Hey everybody, and welcome to the What's a podcast all about today. I'm your host Michael Montalvo, and together we take the history train back in time once again to discover what makes today truly unique. For the next few minutes, we continue to gather random nuggets of trivia to make you sound smart, or just drop that little fact that makes others stop and say, "Hey, who invited you? Like, seriously, why are you here?" On this episode, we examine the events that occurred today, October 9th. I will have cut this out, but for some reason I'm thinking today's October 19th. Looking back at some of the topics that have been coming up, it seems like this is becoming a podcast about war and baseball. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just I may need to do some rebranding. In keeping with this new theme, I have a topic for you today, an event in baseball that happened 100 years ago today. The year was 1919, and on this day, the Cincinnati Reds won the World Series, beating the Chicago White Sox, ultimately resulting in the Black Sox Scandal. Depicted and remembered in part due to films like 8 Men Out and Field of Dreams, probably the biggest scandal in baseball history other than steroids is the conspiring of the 8 White Sox players to throw the World Series. But why would they do this? Accounts vary, but it's thought that a few weeks before the series, first baseman Chick Gandil and gambler Joseph Sport Sullivan met to discuss the possibility of throwing the game. Like anything else, baseball has disgruntled players, and in exchange for inside tips, gamblers would often offer them money. But no one had ever attempted to rig a World Series, and Gandil was skeptical that it could happen. But he eventually agreed, and with the help of a few co-conspirators, would throw the series for the modest sum of $100,000. I did the math on this, and adjusted for inflation is $1,482,994.22 in 2019 money. What I found kind of amazing, though, is that the average salary for a player today is $4.38 million. Quick side note. The salary leader in 1919 was Ty Cobb, and he had a salary of $20,000, or about $296,598.84. So there was a bit more incentive to do it then than there is today. The 8 players that made up the Black Sox were first baseman C. Arnold Chick Gandil, pitcher Eddie Cicotte, pitcher Claude Lefty Williams, shortstop Charles Swede Risberg, outfielder Oscar Happy Felsch, third baseman Buck Weaver, who was in on the early stages but pulled out, utility infielder Fred McMullen, who was brought in because he overheard them talking about the plot, and outfielder Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was approached, but we'll discuss more about him later. With the potential of a large payout from gambling on the game, the White Sox still had to deal with arguably the game's most tight-fisted owner, Charles Cominsky. Players at the time were bound in reserve clauses, which locked in a player to a team for life, and Cominsky was known to exploit this. In an act that truly showed his money-pinching ways, a clause in Cicotte's contract stated that if he won 30 games that season, he would receive a $10,000 bonus. After winning 29 games with still 5 starts to go, Cominsky ordered manager Kid Gleason to stop using him, and Cicotte was benched. Cominsky also underpaid some of his lower-class players, such as Cicotte. Columbia-educated Eddie Collins earned $15,000 that season. Blue-collar Eddie Cicotte was only making half of that, and that may have led to some dislike for Collins. Now, let's back up a bit. While Gandil was recruiting, so was Sullivan. Crooks involved were Sleepy Bill Burns, Bill Maharg, who had no nickname I could find, and also nicknameless Abe Attell. Arnold Rothstein, whom you may recognize from HBO's Boardwalk Empire, was also thought to be involved, although This has never been proven. There has been some evidence to suggest that Scandal may have had multiple deals with multiple syndicates. Abe Patel later said they not only sold the series, but they sold it wherever they could get a buck. Everyone had the White Sox winning the series over the Cincinnati Reds, but soon the odds began to shift as bets were now being made on the Reds in heaps of cash. It got to be so bad that several of the White Sox players were actually accused of being in the pockets of gamblers. Despite all the bad that Cider had experienced through Kaminsky, he was still reluctant to commit to the fix, but after he hit the Cincinnati Reds leadoff batter, the others knew that the deal was on, and almost immediately, people began to suspect that something fishy was going on. What I need you to realize is that at this time, the White Sox were the best team in baseball. For them to be caught cheating would be like if the New England Patriots were caught cheating today. Cider made a series of uncharacteristic blunders that resulted in a loss of 9-1. The New York Times would write, "Never before in the history of America's biggest baseball spectacle has a pennant-winning club received such a disastrous drubbing in an opening game." The Sox continued to lose, and by October 6th, the Reds were favored 4-1. Everything was going to plan. And then they got restless. The bribes were arranged to be received in installments of $20,000, one after each loss, but the gamblers were failing to deliver the full amount. After Game 5, the fix was called off, and during the next two games, the White Sox sprang back to life. But by doing this, however, the gangsters made threats against the players' families, and it was due to this intimidation that the Sox lost Game 8, giving Cincinnati their first ever World Series win. So what happened after? The rumors kept coming, and sports writer Hugh Fullerton wrote, "Is big league baseball being run for gamblers with players in the deal?" Kaminsky later said, "I believe my boys fought the battles of the recent World Series on the level." The 1919 series went largely unexamined until August 31st, 1920, when evidence surfaced that the gamblers had rigged the games. A grand jury convened and investigated, and Bill Maharg went public with his involvement. Accusations mounted, and Eddie Cider gave a tearful testimony saying, "I don't know why I did it. I needed the money. I had the wife and kids." Shortly after that, Shoeless Joe Jackson admitted to having accepted $5,000, and days later, Lefty Williams and Oscar Felsch confessed to their involvement as well. In October 1920, the 8 players were indicted and dubbed the Black Sox. They were blasted in the media, and then sometime before June 1921, all the paper records of their grand jury confessions just up and vanished, resulting in an easy trial for them. No one knows what happened to those papers, but it's believed that Kaminsky and Rothstein arranged to have the papers stolen in order to cover up the scandal. On August 2nd, 1921, the Black Sox were found not guilty on all counts. It wasn't a happy ending, though. The next day, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis, baseball's commissioner, announced that all 8 players were to be permanently banned from organized baseball. Regardless of the verdict of juries, no player who throws the ball game, no player that undertakes or promises to throw a ball game, no player that sits in conference with a bunch of crooked players and gamblers where the ways and means of throwing a ball game are discussed and does not promptly tell his club about it will ever play professional baseball. Some of the players tried to get reinstated. Buck Weaver tried to clear his name every year until his death, but Commissioner Landis made sure none of them would ever set foot on a diamond again. It was a harsh decision for Buck Weaver, who dropped onto the scheme, and for Shoeless Joe Jackson, whose level of involvement was unclear. He had admitted to taking money from the Black Sox, but was an illiterate sharecropper son from South Carolina. He performed well during the series, and that led many to speculate that he knew of the scandal He just didn't participate. The players would produce contradictory accounts, and figures like Arnold Rothstein would never be charged. 3 of the players from the 1919 White Sox were inducted into the Hall of Fame. However, that number could have been so much higher. None of the Black Sox can ever receive that distinction due to the scandal and the ban. And that's going to do it for us today. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the audio version on your podcast app of choice. Links in the description. If you like the podcast and want to hear more, give us a rate and review. That helps me out and lets me know what direction to keep this going in. And hey, if you liked it, share it with a friend. They might like it too. You can find me on social media and at YouTube at the Apple Cider Club. And as always, I want to thank the Tim Kreitz Band for our musical theme. And to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.